Welcome to Maths at Derby interviews. Today we have with us Jack Fisher, who's doing his PhD in mathematics. Hi, Jack.
Hello, Natalie.
Hi. So Jack is doing his PhD on an investigation into a visually impaired or blind person's visualization of mathematics, which is a fascinating topic. So we'll get into that hopefully, but first I want to ask you, Jack, have you, or do you feel that you've been treated differently because you're good at maths?
I wouldn't say differently, but it's interesting when you go to sort of a social event and people ask you what you did your degree in, and as soon as you say something to do with mathematics, people sort of look at you as if you're a bit crazy and don't necessarily know how to continue the conversation.
Well, I've
Uh,
found that, and people kind of recoil a little bit when you say you do
yes,
maths, and they think you're going to ask them some maths questions or something.
something along those lines. Yes,
And
because
yeah, they
yeah,
try and avoid it. But you've had a lifelong passion for mathematics, haven't you?
yeah, more or less. Yes, definitely since
And
GCSEs.
oh right, okay, since back then. And yes, so your PhD, I mean this sort of idea of visualization of mathematics as someone that's obviously sighted, it's not something I've thought about at all. So yeah, perhaps yeah, tell us a bit about your PhD. It'd be fantastic.
I'm sure you have, well, I'm sure you've used this technique many times when you've solved equations, but without realizing it. But when you do mathematics, you sort of almost can visualize writing the maths equations mentally without having to use a pen and paper and solve them sort of line by line as if you were solving them on a pen and paper, but without actually using one. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that before.
Yes, I mean, I find that I need to get sort of pen and paper out at some point because I can't, I'm not a chess player. I can't keep everything in my head at the same time. So I do feel I need to resort to visualizing something with pen and paper at some point.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Whereas when I solve mathematics, I don't necessarily need a pen and paper to solve it. I can do things line by line in my head and recall line by line exactly how what I would have written on a pen and paper.
Wow, and do you find that because of visual impairment that sort of encourages you to do that more, or is it just an aptitude of your mathematical ability?
For me personally, I would say that anyone could do this with practice. I'm a strong believer that anyone can do this no matter what. It just takes practice and time. But I would say that my visual impairment has forced me to learn it probably faster than most people would, or even think about it potentially, because I'm not a particularly fast reader. So it's quicker for me to memorize things and recall them than it is for me to write things down on a piece of paper and have to read them back later.
And do you think that adds to your ability to process mathematics quicker than other people?
I would say so, yes. I would say this is a skill that realistically people should learn because it will help you. It will help you learn other things, not just mathematics. It will help you with listening to conversations a bit better and recalling things that people told you in the past and things like that. And
Oh,
also
so
help you a little bit with strategy. So if you can recall things quicker, you can sort of get from A to B a bit quicker in your head than you would necessarily reading things on a piece of paper.
well, that's really interesting. So I mean, every university should have a class on how to do this. So can you be trained to do this?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
is that what your PhD is about? Is it explaining how this is done, or exploring if
It's not necessarily
people do it?
explaining how, it's more seeing whether how many people with visual impairments can do this and whether they're all doing it in the same way.
And what have you found?
I found that most people will do this. Yes, most people will use some sort of mental ability um, to do mathematics rather than necessarily writing things down. But obviously, everyone's a bit different. So some people will rely a little bit more on reading things back and reading things in braille, or reading, depending on how much sight they have, reading things in larger print. And some people will rely a lot more on having things read to them or listening to audiobooks because they'll just prefer learning from that method.
And how did you conduct the research? Was that interviews with people who are studying mathematics?
Yes, I spoke to people that I haven't necessarily done this as a proper study yet. I need to do that when we return in September. Obviously, I was supposed to do this year, but because of COVID getting in the way, it's not really been possible. The way I've done this so far to test whether my theory's correct or not is that outside of the university, I play visually impaired tennis. So I know a lot of people with visual impairment. So I was able to just quickly ask them how they deal with things with mathematics and have some idea of whether it was worth continuing their study or not.
And you found that people are using various techniques to aid them with mathematics when they
Yes.
can't use text-based material.
Yeah. And it gets very interesting because, well, Braille is written. So when you write something on paper, you might write it in text in necessarily, like says, let's say 3 or 4 pages, but in Braille that might take 6 or 7 pages.
So there's some real barriers to using that technique.
Yes, because everything in, well, mathematics in particularly, but everything in Braille Braille can be done in shorthand as well. But with mathematics, we have a very particular method of writing stuff that relies on positional information. Let's say a fraction. A fraction wouldn't be written with letters next to each other like you would write a word. They'd be written with letters on top of each other, representing a fraction. But when you write in Braille, there is no positional information, so everything is written character by character, sitting next to each other on a page.
I guess when I think about it, I mean, I have trouble, it was a learning experience trying to figure out how to put mathematical notation into a Word document. And so there's another translation level there when you're looking at Braille.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yes. And this can obviously, not every mathematical book will be already converted into Braille. So when you're going into a school or a university, you have to wait for whoever to convert the mathematical text that you need into Braille, be that the lecturer or someone at the university who it is their job to do it, or a third party where you have to send the information off to another company somewhere and wait for it to return. And obviously that can take a very long time. It can usually take 3 or 4 months because of everything being proofread.
And I mean, that probably leads on quite nicely to the next question, because you've been at Derby University now for the last 7 years, I think it is, because you did your degree here, didn't you? And
Yes.
And doing the PhD.
Yeah.
So what kind of support do you feel that you've had at Derby? And did you choose Derby for its mathematics, or did you choose it for its support with visual impairment?
I chose Derby for a few different reasons. I chose Derby because one, before I went to Derby, I went to repeat some of my mathematics A level because I didn't do particularly great at it the first time. And I went to go visit Derby a few times and got to know some of the lecturers. And realistically, it just seemed like a very nice university. It seemed, because it's a smallish university, it kind of seemed more like a family environment, if that makes sense. It seemed more like, you got to know the lecturers a little bit, it wasn't a massive class of, let's say, 100 people. So you the lecturers got to know you and got to know your sort of strengths and weaknesses. And I'm sure you've noticed that too at the university with your lectures.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just, fascinating that you kind of chosen it as much for its friendly community aspects that rather than its facilities, or as well as its facilities that might support you in your visual impairment.
Absolutely. I felt like that was something that I needed sort of because of my visual impairment, I felt like I would prefer a university where, you know, it was perfectly fine for you to pop into some, you know, your lecturer's office and have a random conversation with them about stuff. Where, you know, a university where you can do that easier than necessarily a university where, you know, you're part of 500 students and your lecturers just don't have time to deal with things necessarily.
So what kind of support do you have in lectures themselves?
So when I was doing my degree, I had a sort of equivalent of a teaching assistant who would sit next to me in the lecture and write things on the board, write things on a whiteboard that I would have, or on paper that the lecturer would have written on the whiteboard, and I would not necessarily have to read stuff on the whiteboard. I would listen to what the lecturer was saying to the class, and for me personally, that really helped because I wasn't having to concentrate on notation at the same time as having to concentrate on what was being explained to the class. I would just have to listen to the explanations, and I feel like that really helped.
So you'd have your own sort of one-to-one support person sitting next to you in the classroom, and Derby University provided that.
Yes,
that's amazing. Yeah. And then, how does that translate, out of interest, how does that translate to online? Because obviously we've all had to go online since March. Do you have that? Is there a similar kind of support that how does that translate?
It's, for me personally, I prefer the classroom experience to online experience. I feel like I understand things better.
That's in the classroom rather than online. Yeah.
Yes. And it's a little bit easier if you need someone like a teaching assistant in the classroom with you, or support, I don't know what the correct term is, but a support person in the classroom with you. It's a bit harder to deal with that online because if you needed to clarify something with the support, you couldn't necessarily do that because you'd interrupt the whole lecture.
Okay. And the support person you have, is that someone that is has skills in mathematics, or a support person can be?
Technically, it can be anyone. I was lucky enough to have someone that also did a degree in physics.
Oh, okay, that's handy.
So, yes, I was very lucky. They will do their best to make sure that you have someone that is relatively good at mathematics, but obviously that's easier said than done.
And your support person gets a free degree in maths at the same time, by the sounds of it.
Basically, yes.
So everyone's a winner.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And do you have any technology that you use to assist you when you're doing private study?
I use screen readers and magnifiers, magnification software. I tend to use magnification software when I'm writing stuff on my laptop and things, and I tend to use screen readers when I'm reading stuff off my iPad. I tend to use multiple software at the same time, so I tend to use the iPad to read things and the laptop to write things at the same time.
And is it any specialist software, or is it integrated stuff? Or?
For my iPad, for the screen reader, I use the inbuilt voiceover inbuilt into the iPad, and for my magnification, I use a piece of software called Supernova or Dolphin Magnifier.
Okay.
It's known as both terms.
And I understand that you created a piece of software that would read maths as part of your, was it as part of your dissertation for your undergraduate?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Yes, I built a piece of software that can, to some extent, read mathematics written in LaTeX, and you can write your own documents and it will read out what you've written, so that you can then copy and paste them into a LaTeX editor and send them off as a PDF file to your supervisor. So
you're not just studying these experiences, you're a man of action. You've actually gone out there and built the kit.
Yeah, well. Honestly, I'm someone that is I'm much more of a practical person than I am a theoretical person. So I like to actually do things rather than necessarily read about things.
And your overall experience of studying at Derby, because you've just got 1 year left now, do you feel that you've had the same experience as other people that don't have a disability or don't have visual impairment?
I feel like yes, I feel like I've had the same experience. I feel like to some extent my support has definitely helped me a lot more through the degree and because of the fact that I haven't had to rely on notation, I feel like almost that my degree, it was a bit easier than it was for other people, because I was able to just recall everything from the lecture without having to read all the notes, and I found it easier to learn what was going on because I didn't have to multitask and concentrate more on what I was writing than necessarily understanding what was being read by the lecturer.
So that's an incredibly positive experience then, by the sounds of it.
Yes, I very much enjoyed the degree.
Fantastic. And then what do you hope to do once you've done the degree, once you've finished the PhD?
I'd like to go into some sort of teaching element. I've quite enjoyed doing things like the maths clinic and stuff at the university, and helping out with all the support somewhere along the lines of being like an advisor or something for support, making sure everything's accessible as possible.
Well, I know we were in, that's how kind of we met in the first years, and you were assisting the lecturer in the classroom. Yes. And coming around and helping us all, and so that was absolutely invaluable. And yes, you mentioned before to me, I think as well, that you've actually been involved in changing accessibility around the university as well. Can you tell us about those projects?
Yeah, I've just been advising people on how to make sure things were color-coded, and making sure that things weren't all see-through, like all glass doors and stuff like that, making sure that they had something on them that you could see that was the door, and not just, a glass window or something that you weren't supposed to enter or exit through. Like, for example, color coding the gateway into Kedleston Road, making sure that they weren't just see-through.
Is that the security gates?
Yeah, security gates, yeah.
And they're black, aren't they?
That's correct. I think they're black or dark blue, yeah.
Right, okay. So, but they were see-through before?
They were originally, they were supposed, I don't know if it was changed before they were built.
Right.
Or whether they were put in as see-through first and then changed.
Yeah.
Because, well, we were moved to Markeaton, so I can't exactly remember when they were built. But yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's amazing. And I suppose so the final question would be, do you have any advice for people that have visual impairment that are thinking of joining any university, and Derby, and in particular mathematics?
I think my advice would be to go for it. There's nothing to lose. There's always people there willing to help you, from the university putting in support to, making friends at the university that will probably help you with things as well, to just, it's a good experience. Most universities will do their best to make sure that you will pass your degree, and you'll enjoy it, hopefully.
Excellent. Well, it's been lovely chatting to you, and yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Sort of chatting with you last year, and as I say, all your support with the mathematics has been brilliant. And as I say, that's how we kind of met and got on and so on. But with any luck, we'll be back on campus in September, and we'll catch up again in the cafes and the classroom then.
Yes, hopefully, yes.
Wonderful. Well, keep safe and healthy and well till then. And
thank you, and you. Yes.
See you in September.
Yes. See you in September.